Have you ever wondered why your business has miraculously just stopped growing? Or maybe you've wondered, how do I actually continue to grow the business? Well, we're going to be discussing this and so much more on this episode of All Things Locs. All right, welcome back to All Things Locs, the podcast where we talk about leadership, operations, culture, and strategies for growth. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Neissany. I'm my co-host and co-founder, Antonio Garcia. And today we're talking about strategies for growth. Oh, baby, this is exciting, Antonio. What do you think, dude?
This one I get pretty fired up over because I think this is one that people tend to miss quite a bit, is just being strategic.
Okay. But that poses a question, though. The hell is strategy, or what is strategic growth? Like, what does that actually even mean?
So what I have for us when we look at strategy, a good definition is a plan of action designed to achieve specific goals and long-term success. That's it. It's like the X's and O's of what we need to do on a step-by-step to get your business from where it's at to where you want it to ultimately go.
So you're saying I can't just wing it as I go along?
You can, but that typically doesn't end well for people.
I knew there's a reason that business failed.
Yeah, 100%. So here's a couple of really good questions. So for you, if you're watching, have you ever wondered how someone can pump out so many products, but you really can't think of any? Have you ever seen any companies that do the same thing, that start at the same time in the same market, but one skyrockets and one completely sputters out and just implodes? Have you ever wondered like what they actually did? Have you ever seen Fortune 500 companies that applied a specific strategy, but they end up losing billions and billions of dollars in a week? I'm sure we've seen that. We probably think of a handful that have done that. And here's the last question for you too as well. Have you, maybe in your own business, maybe you applied the right strategy, but at the wrong time, and you actually got a really bad result? So that's all about strategy. We're going to be taking a deep dive on that. And kind of with what we did with operations is that there's common myths around strategy, right? And for this, here's a few of them that we're going to be taking a deep dive on. Is that strategy is just another way of saying just long-term planning. We know that that's not right. There's a lot of differences when it comes to that. That a great product equals a great strategy. Oh my God. Strategy is only for big business. And once you have a strategy, you don't need to change it. And a couple others like, oh, we'll figure out strategy later.
Yeah.
We're too lost in the trenches. So this is something that you've definitely worked with different companies on, where they're almost so stuck in the weeds of things, it feels like they don't have time to look long term. What do you kind of say to that when you're working with someone and that seems to be the case from their point of view?
Go look up Blockbuster. I mean, you know, it's there's enough stories out there to show. I mean, like Blockbuster actually, that's the one I always go to. That's like my primo example. And if you're young enough, you're probably, what is Blockbuster? Most of us, we remember Blockbuster, and it was like a time-honored tradition, like especially on a Friday or Saturday, going to a store, imagine that, and actually renting a tape. But
it's so crazy we have to explain that, before streaming.
Before streaming, exactly. And they had the ability to buy, this is why I love that story, they actually had the ability to buy Netflix when Netflix first came out for like a ridiculously cheap amount.
Yeah.
And they said, no, we're good. This is the brick and mortar is the way to go. Where is there a Blockbuster now? Unless you're living up in Oregon where this is the last one ever. They're gone. So when you're not thinking, what's the long-term changes? What could occur? What do we have to be prepared for? You know, and again, it's not just healthcare where things happen all the time. Like life happens.
Yeah.
We don't have to go that far back, unfortunately, to think about the pandemic. Shit happens that we have to not necessarily be prepared for, because you can't prepare for everything. You can't prepare for the stock market to crash and your portfolio to drop 50 or 60%, but you could do things to safeguard yourself and put yourself in a better position to rebound real quick. You know, and I'll kind of use that as an example, and then we'll dive back in. It's like even during the pandemic, some businesses did phenomenal, especially like restaurants, and it's because they had the foresight to think, hey, maybe we should do delivery, or maybe we can build a drive-through when they never had that before.
Yeah.
So it's not just necessarily how do we plan for stuff that we can't plan for, but it's also just how to pivot and set ourselves up for long-term success.
Yeah, it's definitely a mindset thing. So kind of what you mentioned, like there was With what happened with the pandemic, it's like that threw a lot of people off guard. And the ones that won and continue to win with their business are the ones that were nimble enough with their thinking more than anything. Like, how can I win despite? How can I adjust even when this is going on? So it's about leveraging the company's strengths. It's about navigating through different challenges that might be coming up. So even in the world of healthcare, where there might be a piece of legislation that changes. And like now what once was covered is now gone. And that was your business's bread and butter. And it's like, all right, well, how do we stay nimble enough? How do we work around it to continue to win and not lay off people and not implode as a company? And also just different opportunities to capitalize on in the market. So here's a good place here, that a great product equals a great strategy. Seems like it's a bit of a myth, but when you hear that, like, what do you kind of think of? Like, this is a good product, therefore it's a good strategy.
I mean, like, there's been plenty of people who had great products that we've never heard of because they had no way to deliver it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
that's very true. You see this in a lot of shows like Shark Tank, where it's like
there's plenty of best-selling books that have sold nothing.
Yeah.
Because they didn't know how to actually bring it to market.
There was like really great books that just didn't go to market.
They went nowhere.
They went nowhere. Yep.
Yeah, and to your point about Shark Tank, it's like, wow, it's a phenomenal idea, but where were they before?
Yeah.
So it's and understanding that without having, I mean, you
that's
gotta
like
have something to sell. Clearly.
Yeah. So it's like a marketing strategy that wasn't in place.
Yeah. It's like, what do you do after that? It's like you don't just like open up a business. Like, I'm here now, and people show up. You have to have a way to actually grow that and get to the masses, and then be able to take it to the next level.
Yeah. It feels like strategy when we talk about it with clients. It's like there's like a sales strategy, there's a marketing strategy, there's an operational strategy, there's a financial strategy that we could take advantage of if someone's trying to grow or duplicate what's working with their own clinic and start expanding out into maybe another city or another area of town. That there's like financial strategies and other kind of other instruments that you can leverage inside of your company that'll help you reduce down your tax drag. And that's under that umbrella of strategy, where people think that it's just one thing, but it's actually a few different angles. That's this encompassing side of business that I think tends to kind of go off on the wayside. So how do you kind of communicate that with your people when it's like strategy is this, and it's like, no, it's far more of an umbrella thing that we have to appreciate? Yeah,
I mean, honestly, I think a lot of it too is just not getting so wrapped up in just the vernacular. And what I mean by that is I feel that some people, they get so engrossed with just, I gotta be strategic. It's like, just at the end of the day, like, what are you doing to help grow? What are you doing to help improve? So if we're looking at, you mentioned sales and marketing as a good one. It's being able to just observe, are they actually working? Like, is your sales team at the level where they should be? And how do we maybe get it to the next level? Or is your marketing actually getting you business? So is your social media strategy correct? Are you targeting the right people? So when we're looking at strategy, it's not just some pie in the sky or go to the back office and think for 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
It's just looking at all of the points of your business, like you mentioned, and just figuring out, how do I actually elevate them? And what's my plan to improve them? And that's really what it is. It's just, what's my plan to get better?
100%. And just to kind of continue on that, it's that when we're looking at things strategically, like, what is the method or the guide that we're using that leads us to our decision making, right? Like, if we're for something or if we're against something, and what's kind of the principles behind it and the ultimate objective with the company or with the individual. And that's what guides the hand for our decision making process.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it perfectly. It's what's our goal? What are we going after? And you talked about tax strategy. I mean, even in our own personal lives, we do things for what our motivating factor is. So it's the same thing in business. It's what are we actually going after? And I find that that's when we're talking to other businesses, I find that that's the big challenge. A lot of times it's they don't even know where they want to go. It's just, I want to make more money.
It's like, how much?
Here's $1.
Yeah.
Does that count? So it's really having a full and clear understanding of, all right, where do we want to go? And then being able to unpack what are the necessary steps that we have to take to get there. And that if you want to call it action steps, that is your strategy. That's actually figuring out, all right, I want to get to 10 million. That's going to be very different if your goal is to get to 40 million. You're definitely not doing the same thing. So it's being able to first and foremost simply understand, where do I want to take this company to? And then everything else is a lot easier based off of that.
Yeah, it seems like that's kind of one of the key things that gets dropped the most, I would say, with people, where it's like where do you want to take this thing? Like what even just as boring and much of the biggest eye roll it can be sometimes, is just like, what's the ultimate goal with this? Like, are you trying to retire? Are you trying to do this? Or, okay, great. Like, where's the company at now in terms of revenue? What's your profit margin? What's your net? Like, whatever it is, right? And sometimes when you ask them, like, all right, well, where do you want this to be in a few years? And it's like, I've actually never really had the time to think about it, let alone lock in on a number and go after it. It's like, well, let's actually do that now. Like, all right, where are you at now? And you want to hit a certain number. Great, cool. And what ends up happening is that once you lock in on that number and you reverse engineer the things you need to do to accomplish or achieve that, sometimes what ends up happening is this one thing is like, oh, wow, it's actually easier to maybe 10x my company than what I thought. And there's a handful of books kind of written around this, where it ends up being a mindset and strategy. Again, kind of what guides us in our decision making is that when there's that great book, I think it was by Hardy, and was it Benjamin Hart? 10x is easier than 2x.
I mean, really honest, I don't know.
So I think that was it. And so there's a mindset around strategy. There's a mindset. It's not just how you're thinking, but it's kind of the goals behind it. Thinking big. There's this great book called The Magic of Thinking Big, and I think this is a good thing to really talk about. We want to segue into it because when it comes to strategy, there's a lot of different ways to skin this cat, and it really depends on your business's needs. And it's so hard to offer specific strategies for a company on a podcast like this, because it varies just so much. It's just too many variables. However, there is a mindset component that I think tends to be overlooked quite a bit. There's a heart set component, there's a mindset component. And I feel like what ends up happening is that when people are trying to be strategic on like what steps to take next, is that they hide behind a veil of practicality to almost mask their willingness to actually scale. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, maybe explain that a little bit further if you don't mind.
So, when you're telling a client like, "Hey, we can 10x this thing," like you have everything under your umbrella to 10x this thing in 2 years, and they're like, "I could, how?" Right? And when you show it to them, sometimes they get in their own way through belief or through their mindset.
Yes.
And they will fall in this kind of idea of this is unreasonable, it's impractical, it's not really done before, therefore it may not work. And it's not the X's and O's, it's just the belief of.
I'm glad you brought that, because I was going to ask you that. And outside of that's not doable, I also think about that person, especially if they're more established and maybe they're in the tail end of their career, and their mentality is, I'm not looking to grow 10x.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not looking to be this massive ass company with all these extra responsibilities, or the person who's at the tail end of their career, and it's just, man, I just want to keep it the same. I just want to keep doing what I was doing, reduce my stress and just make the same amount of money. How do you, and again, for that person, you might say, well, what the hell are they doing with maybe a coach or what have you? But how do you just have those conversations centered? Because they're reasonable, right? It's everybody will get to a point later in life where it's just you want to reduce your stress, you want to enjoy yourself and not add more to your plate. And then there is just the person who's like, I want to keep things manageable. So 10x scares the hell out of me. So that's a no.
Yeah. So why don't we start like with baby steps? So like, all right, 10x, taking your company and moving it, over the moon from your perspective is like, this is an uncomfortable thing. Okay, cool. Got it. No big deal. Do you feel like there's areas of your business that could be sharpened so you can just make more revenue, or you can make your life easier? You could reduce your labor costs. You can reduce maybe your own workload. Like, Are there things of the business you feel like that's possible?
Yeah.
It's like, yes. Okay, cool. Would it be okay if we make some money in the process? Yeah. Okay, cool. And if we're outpacing inflation, or if you stay the same and we're staying at the same rate of inflation, where do you think the company's going to be in the next like 5 years? Do you think it's going to eat into your profits or not? It's like duh, right?
Yeah.
So ultimately, when conversations go that way, and it really depends on the individual. When we're talking about being in a state of abundance, it's like, bro, you can have everything that you want. Like, you can have your cake and eat it too in this world. It's totally possible. Don't think that you, in order for you to, 10x your business, you're going to sacrifice things with your family. It's like, no, there's kind of ways around it. As long as you're wise and as long as you have a really good strategy and a really good plan in place and you're following it and you're being nimble enough and flexible enough to make adjustments. So if 10x is like this number where like you're immediately turned off, no big deal. Let's refine some boulders and eliminate some of these boulders and just start there and see where it takes us. And maybe it'll be easier than you thought. Maybe this 10x is actually going to be an automatic byproduct of the little things that we're doing here. And would you be opposed to it? Because if you don't want that revenue, I'll take it.
Yeah. So you brought up two things there. That person maybe gets scared of just the growth of like what that entails. To your point, it's very reasonable too.
Yeah, and the risk of losing it.
Yeah, it's like I don't want to lose my time with my family. I want to go be able to pick up my kids from school or go to their ball games. So if that's your concern, I'd say go back 2 episodes ago and listen to the episode on operations and systems, because that's going to come into play huge. But then, you also mentioned, and I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but you mentioned just the basic concept of inflation, which for a lot of you right now, that actually is a big topic of conversation. It's not just due to the election, but it's actually, we're talking about financials, and inflation has been an issue the last few years. And I get the idea of talking to a lot of business owners that they don't actually understand what that does to their bottom line and how staying stagnant is not a strategy.
Yeah.
So I just want you guys to hear what Antonio is saying, is that if inflation is at minimum of 3%. I know some of you are probably like, oh, it's more than that still. But let's just say, let's just say it's 3%. If your company's not making at least 3%, you're losing. So if you go back a few years ago when inflation was 9, 10, 11%, if your company didn't make more than that, you lost. So I just want you to wrap your head around that when you say, I'm good, not growing, that you shouldn't be. And you have to understand that, hey, I made the same amount last year. That means I lost money. So what is the effect of that?
100%. And it's also just not leveraging certain loopholes that might be available to you.
Legal.
Yeah. So it'd be morally, ethically legal. And some of those loopholes could be simply as like, integrating some kind of insurance policy strategy, like just something as simple as that, or something with trusts, and that can look very different from business to business and what's going on with the business owner. But there's a lot of little things there that you can use too that, quite frankly, a lot of companies, they leverage, especially around bonuses, where to place certain finances. And obviously this is something you want to talk to like your attorney, you want to talk to like your CPA, talk to an accountant, making sure that based off of where you live, this applies. But there's all kinds of financial strategies there that can help you mitigate against inflation, or if a vendor goes out or something. So there's a lot of stuff there, but it is a mindset too that we have to, kind of what you mentioned, I think a couple episodes back, of always constant improvement. And I think where it really boils down to is the soundness of your thinking. Like, how are you thinking? Is it the same way you did 5 years ago, or is there kind of an elevated version of you today that only benefits your business, yourself, your family, your friends, and your employees? So that's a huge thing, I think, for me. And it kind of feels like this is a good segue into one of them. These myths here is that we'll always figure out strategy later. We'll figure it out later. That entrepreneurs think they can delay working on strategy, focus on like some of the immediate operational tasks, assuming they'll figure strategy as they go. That doesn't really work out either, right? Like, when should someone start thinking about placing and finding that goal, that objective, and that ultimate North Star for their business?
Yeah, well, ideally at the beginning, because what the hell are you going into business for? But everybody should have a rationale for doing something, right? There's a goal or a why. But where I feel like people get a little tripped up is they don't go back to revisit it. So the goal for year 1 should not be the same goal for year 10. But some people, they go back like, oh shit, I haven't like actually looked at my goal for like 7 years. So then what are you really working towards? You know, it's like that person who signed up for the gym and they're like, I want to lose that 30 pounds. Well, that was 5 years ago. They lost the 30 pounds and they've been kind of like, what's your goal now for working out? Gee, I don't really know. So the best time is the beginning, but then you need to have a process set up by which you are analyzing it periodically. It doesn't mean you have to change your goal daily. Now, some of you might say, well, I look at my goals every day. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
In business, most of you are probably not going to do that, but you should be looking at it quarterly, biannually, every 6 months or so to see, A, are we on track to hit the goal?
Yeah.
And number 1, what if we blew past it?
Like, yeah, how do we know we didn't trip over it?
Yeah, so it's like, wow, we blew past that. If I waited, what if I waited another 6 months to look at what my previous goal was? You would have wasted essentially 6 months because you're going after something that you already blew past by. So it's just making sure that you're adjusting as you go along. And if you're doing this in the right way, it's like moving the goalposts a little bit further. It's like, all right, now I'm going to move it 5 yards. Now I'm going to move it 5 yards. And it's just, you keep adjusting based off of how you're doing currently.
You said something that's really important where it's really easy to waste resources. That if you don't have that North Star or that ultimate objective that you're working towards and you're looking at it every day, every week, every month, every quarter with your team, that it's really easy to waste resources on things that don't matter towards the ultimate goal. And what ends up happening is that there's a lot of missed opportunities because of that. And that actually just stifles you. And it's a really good filtration system that when you have your strategy and your ultimate goal right in front of you, everything you can ask yourself thereafter when an opportunity comes, or if there's a joint venture opportunity, or there's vendors that you're talking to, there's more offers that you're trying to add to your business, and you're asking yourself, like, will this get me to my ultimate goal? Does this distract me from my ultimate goal? Does this completely jeopardize my ultimate goal? And so now, in actually taking the time to do that, now you are able to be strategic because of your ultimate vision with the business. Yeah. Right? That's a big one, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the person who says we're doing phenomenal. We're making, $2 million a year. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but wasn't your goal $3 million?
Yes,
well, yeah, I mean, it was. So then what are you doing to get there? If it's reasonable, you're not going to go from year 1, like $5 to, $100 million. But what if it's reasonable? Why are you not changing your strategy to get to that point?
How much would you say is like, there's some people that are like wired a certain way,
no doubt.
Right? Like, hey, you're a brilliant doctor, you're a brilliant business owner, you're a brilliant CEO of a marketing agency, whatever. And what makes them brilliant could be maybe other stuff that we cover here in Locs. Like maybe their leadership is really great. Maybe their culture is really great. Their operations are really great. But when it comes to the offensive side of the ball, sure, that there's a certain wiring that maybe some don't have, where it's like, we're just don't know how to think like that. Like, how do I connect those dots? Yeah. I see dots, but I don't know how to connect the dots and move in that direction to elevate the business. So when you're working with someone where it's like, they just don't see it. And how much of it is a teaching thing, and how much is it like, hey, this is where you need to bring like maybe a consultant or a team member, somebody that rounds you out in that space?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think there is that concept of you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Right. So you start learning about just systems, or how to grow and how to improve every area of the business, and you start getting exposed to things that I didn't realize that even was there. I didn't realize that existed. So there is that aspect. Mm-hmm. And then, does the person have the capabilities to act on that knowledge, so to speak? But then there is, just to your point, hey, I'm just not good at that. Like, I'm just very analytical, or I maybe as a business owner have a very dominant kind of person. Like, I act without thinking.
Yeah.
That's probably not the person who's going to be sitting down and like really formulating a well thought out long-term strategy. Mm-hmm. And those are the individuals, outside of just, getting some really good coaching going on, you have to, I think I mentioned this on 2 episodes ago. So you have to bring in people who have those abilities. And what I mean by that is this starts even just with your hiring process. So when you're like, oh, how about a hiring strategy? How about you don't hire the same people over and over again? And you hire somebody that is a little bit more analytical. And like, I'll give you a good example. So I was at a seminar like last year or so, and it was actually a Tony Robbins seminar, and he's very dominant, full of energy, take action immediately, but not always taking time to sit down and like structure stuff out. And he told a really good story about an assistant that he hired who just loved, the kind of person that loves Excel spreadsheets, like that person. And he's like, she brought so much organization and helped me see things better. Cause I'm just like, I'm running. And that's what a lot of business owners do, right? It's like, all right, let's get going and we'll worry about that later. And then you have the other person who's like, all right, let's put this all together and see how this fits and see if this makes sense long-term. Or are we just going to take action now and it's going to set us back either monetarily, or it's going to set us back weeks or months or maybe even years to kind of recover from that. So there is that process of understanding your own strengths and weaknesses and knowing, all right, where am I just not good at? And don't feel bad about it, because we all have areas that we're terrible at. And spending that much energy into getting something marginally better when you could just hire somebody, make your life a lot easier, and it really help the business that much more.
There's also a strategy when it comes to like personal development too as well. Like if there's areas of your mindset, or there's areas of kind of how you're doing things, your communication or whatever it is, that you can be strategic on elevating those areas that are a little bit weak. And I do agree with that it just like it kind of takes a village to raise a family, like it does take a stellar team and complementary pieces to make just a phenomenal company. Whatever companies that you might be like admiring or you really look up to, or like, oh my God, like they really did things right. And it's like, was it really a one person show? Like not really. And so if you're ever feeling that way, if you're feeling like there's maybe knowledge gaps, or there's like vision gaps of like, I am so stuck in the trenches every single day, I don't really have time to kind of look up and see what I'm doing in 2025 or in 2026, or let alone what my numbers will look like, or the personnel that I need in order to achieve that, or the operations I'm going to need to do that, or adjustments in my leadership, or the list goes on and on and on. And don't fret. That's actually like why you and I are here, is for that, is to make sure that our team is able to support you in your endeavor, and we're able to peel back the onion on what's effective, what's not, specifically for you and specifically for your business. Because it's so true that it varies so much depending on where they're at and what their ultimate goal is.
Yeah, and that's a very fair point. I think kind of how you just ended that statement right there. The way I also look at it too is, do you simply know your numbers, right? It's like how many business owners you ask them, like, what'd you do revenue-wise? No clue. Or what's your goal to increase it? No idea. Mm-hmm. And then they look at if they even look at their profit and loss statement, if they even know how to read it, and they're like, holy shit, what, like you mentioned earlier, it's like, why isn't this number bigger? Like the amount of work I'm putting in, I feel like my revenue should be a lot more. And it's outside of looking at things that will help grow the company, maybe services that we can add on, or a company that maybe it's a service that you use a lot and you can buy that person, or buy the vendor, I should say. What's your thoughts though on the aspect of, I'll call it maybe cost containment, of also, we speak about offense and defense, and adding services, and whether it's new providers, whatever it is more of an offensive approach. And then being able to look at something like a profit and loss and see, all right, where are we spending money that we don't need to spend on? What's your thoughts on that aspect?
I think it's critical. So when you're looking at kind of like what you mentioned, like are there things that I'm spending unnecessary money on? Are there substitutes that are actually cheaper? Are there other vendors? Are there other partners? Are there services that I can kind of reduce down or eliminate or bundle someplace else? So those little things also have a tremendous compound effect too. And that's kind of a strategy within itself, is that kind of cost containment initiative. And because all that does is just reduces your risk moving forward. That if you're not so bloated with your budget and you're able to trim that up, the byproduct of that is just more revenue and better profits. And then you're able to kind of do more things to be back on the offensive side. So you might want to trim the fat of the business so it's leaner and meaner. And the excess of that is just extra revenue. And then it takes a team like, what should we do with this? Should we develop a war chest? Should we move into another market? Should we put it into an insurance policy? And that does take a team to kind of think of what would be best, just so you can check each other's blind spots. There might be an idea or a strategy that's introduced to the business owner by us that they never thought of that's actually 1,000 times better than what they're thinking. That happens all the time. It's not to toot our own horn, but when someone is looking at their business through a keyhole and it's just them versus us that we've seen quite a bit, we know what could work just because our experience is a lot larger.
Yeah.
And the people that we have in our network too as well.
Yeah, no, and you mentioned a really interesting aspect is you're making revenue, and I love the people who you get very excited, especially like more so at the beginning stages. You get very excited when your revenue starts growing, but then that euphoria almost leads into, hey, let's just spend it now. Like, let's just buy shit that we don't need because we got the money. Mm-hmm. And like, good times are going to be coming forever, right? It's like that old thing. And then, kind of shit hits the fan. It's like, uh-oh, like, to your point, we got bloated expenses, or we have all this equipment that we didn't need, and is maybe the clothing rack now, and for the office employees. So there's that aspect too of knowing, all right, we're doing well. What do we do with it? And that's it's no different than like personal, right? It's like you make a lot of money, you don't just want to put it in your savings account and make like 0.02%. Like, that's a terrible strategy. But then there's a lot of businesses that either do something like that or they just spend needlessly because they have it.
Yeah. They're trying to do that so they're also eliminating their tax drag, but there's other ways of kind of going about it. So it just varies so much from business to business. And the best thing for people is to connect with other coaches, connect with the consultants, even connect with someone like us, and then we can kind of map out some of those things for them.
Yeah, 100%. I love it. If you don't get excited by this, then don't get into business. I mean, seriously though, and I'm gonna speak just very quickly for some healthcare individuals out there. You guys have a lot of you have great souls, very altruistic, and the conversation around finances and money is typically like, it's off topic. It's like, off limits. Yeah, it's like, I'm treating people like we can't be talking about making money. Healthcare is still a business. And here's the fact is that you have employees, and a lot of those employees have families. So if you're not increasing your business through the right strategic moves, and you're not preparing yourself, whether it's offensive or defensive, you're not just hurting yourself. You're actually hurting the people you work with, and you're hurting their families as well. And you need to just, fully understand that it's a responsibility, which is why being an owner or even running a clinic, it's not to be taken lightly. So when we're talking about finances and maybe it makes you a little uncomfortable, you got to get over it. This is a business at its core. The more money you make, the more you can reinvest back into the business. You can reinvest back into your employees, back into customer care or patient care, whatever you want to call it. So there's great things you can do with improved finances. And really, when you're talking, or if you're thinking about maybe building a legacy or doing something for the next generation, if that's something that you're thinking about, that can only come into play with the right strategic sound plan. All right, welcome back to the follow-up or bonus episode that is going to be talking about strategic growth for healthcare clinics and organizations. So talked a lot about how to set your strategy and how to really be focused on growth. And, obviously we've discussed that if you're not beating inflation, I'm going to honestly be speaking about this over and over again because there's just a lot of business owners who don't understand this concept. If you're not making more revenue than what inflation is, you're losing. So just understand that. When we're looking at healthcare and we're trying to figure out how can I grow, how can I increase my revenue when health insurance costs are going up and reimbursement from insurance is going down, right? So you're like, this seems like a pretty damn near impossible thing that we're doing here. And we're not talking about adding more and more patients because that's not a strategy. It's really a strategy. Well, it is a strategy, just not for growth. It's a strategy that is based on burning people out. So if you're looking at it saying, I don't want to add so many more patients, we really can't even do that. How do I increase my revenue? And I'm not looking also to open more practices. So one of the few things that you can do within healthcare is you have to start looking at what kind of services can I add to what I'm already doing. Now, most of the time, we're going to be talking about, wellness or prevention programs. And the challenge that I see with that is that most people are not very based on prevention. They're based on getting treated when they're sick or when they're hurting. So if you're looking to really grow something significantly, wellness program is just going to be a slice of the pizza pie, so to speak. So you have to have multiple avenues to really start bringing in additional revenue. When we're looking at adding more services, what do you do a lot of that you maybe could incorporate in, or what are you not doing any of that you refer out for? So maybe you refer to an orthopedic doctor, or maybe you refer a lot of patients, if you're a physical therapist, you refer a lot of them to chiropractors. Can you hire a chiropractor? Can you bring that individual into your clinic or into your organization? Can you bring on medical doctors? And I know some of you might say, I don't want to do that. That's not for me. That's okay. That might be for somebody else though. Maybe you're a very heavily orthopedic-based practice that refers a lot of orthopedic patients out. You say, maybe I could bring a doctor into my organization. Or I like to, dispense some durable medical equipment to patients, but I don't do that myself. Again, I refer that out. Okay, can you bring that in-house? So it's being able to look at what am I referring out for that I could potentially bring within the four walls of my own clinic or organization. Now, vertical integration in healthcare, the studies show it doesn't work. And it's usually because it's just not applied the right way. More so in the sense that it's applied in a way that is meant to just maximize the shit out of patients in terms of billing them for stuff they don't need and giving them, services and treatments that really aren't required. So they fail from the standpoint of improving patient outcomes. But if done right, and I've seen it done right because I've been in a setting where it was really run efficiently, these things can greatly help patients. And yes, it's about increasing revenue is what we're talking about here, but the best way to do that is to increase your patient outcomes. So I want you guys to focus on, what do I refer a lot of things out for that potentially can I bring in? What are we not offering right now that patients would actually utilize? And if you say, how do I even know what that is? It's called actually getting feedback from your patients. Like, talk to them first and see, hey, if I added this, would you be interested? Because again, we all also think that we have great ideas, but if the market, which is in this case our patients, aren't looking for it and they don't want to do it, then it's going to go nowhere. So really, those are the things I want you guys to really start focusing on is, what am I referring a lot out for? What are patients looking for that we're not doing? And start there, keep it simple, but ultimately I really want you just to understand what does growth look like for me? And really figuring out that you can't stay plateaued, you can't stay stagnant. We have to have a vision of where we want to be so we can then identify the right action steps to get there. So I'm going to leave you off with that. We're going to definitely be diving into this topic so much more in the future and getting way more specific, but this is just something I want you to start kind of marinating on and maybe looking around in your own business, seeing where can we add stuff that would actually help us and alleviate maybe some financial strain, or just help us grow that much more, where we can now help patients and the employees that much more. I'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for joining.